Hello, I'm here to read my final book in the trilogy, Lessons from Life. And we're dealing here with Take No Thought for Your Life. This is from Matthew chapter 6. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus deals with two root problems in Christians' lives: hypocrisy and covetousness. Satan has no direct access to our hearts, neither do we. We can't control or change our motives, but we can make conscious decisions to think in a certain way. The reason Christians don't change is because they're not willing to alter the way they think. Romans 12 verse 2 tells us to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. A disciple can't be covetous of money, the love of which is the root of all evil. Their lifestyle, which comes from how they think, must prove that they have only one master. When Jesus says, take no thought for your life, he's talking about the self-life, our own life, our independence, what we want for ourselves. And Jesus contrasts this self-life with the life, the spiritual life, which is the source and fount of our relationship with God. This life shines through when the self-life is at its lowest ebb. In persecution, suffering and great distress, the life of Jesus seems to shine all the more brightly. We have to consciously deal with covetousness when we spot it in our lives. People can spend hours browsing through catalogues looking at fashion, kitchens, power tools, cars, computers, teasing themselves with things that they can't afford. Renew your mind and take no thought for your life. We serve our own lives and are covetous, or we serve Christ and are content. Challenging. You know, I was just remembering some years back when Maurice and I went to a conference centre and took all our 3 children with us for the first time. We'd talked beforehand about the sleeping arrangements to ensure that I could get the best possible sleep, as for coming up to 8 years I'd been consistently subjected to broken sleep with the children. Maurice and I had been to this particular conference centre a couple of times previously and had always been accommodated in a spacious twin-bedded room with ensuite bathroom. So I'd planned for Nathan, he was the eldest boy, to take up the extra bed in my bedroom, and Maurice, who would be in the identical bedroom next door to mine, he was supposed to be with Isaac because Isaac snored like a trooper and had an internal body clock which demanded he woke every morning around 6 o'clock, and Tamar, who was still yet in a cot. All went well until we opened the doors to the rooms and found the layout to be completely different to what I had anticipated. We'd been housed in a different block than usual, and these rooms had double beds instead of twin single beds, with only a shower and no bath. The rooms were so small that when the cot was put at the bottom of the bed, we had to really breathe in to get past it to the other side of the bed. My family were going to be here for 4 days, and all I could think about was how Tamar would be inconvenienced with nowhere to play, nowhere to have a bath. I talked with the staff and did my utmost to change into different accommodation, but the block we normally booked at the conference centre had been completely taken up by another group who were also using their facilities. Well, the final straw to break the camel's back came when Maurice told me that he couldn't believe how negative I'd become. As it seemed to him, I was complaining and finding problems everywhere. I was so miffed that I walked out of the room in disgust. How on earth could he know how I felt? The children were my responsibility, and it was always left to me to work things out. That very evening, at the very first conference meeting, Maurice was approached by the organisers and asked if he and I would take part in the next meeting, which was to be held the following morning. I was quite bleary-eyed when I arrived at the meeting the next morning. I felt as though I'd done a few rounds in the boxing ring with Muhammad Ali during the night. I'd been convinced in my own mind that I'd taken the easiest option, having Nathan, rather than one of the younger children with me. But I hadn't anticipated any of the kicks or punches he threw at me, and I really wasn't in a very good mood. My fears about the change in plans for the sleeping arrangements had been confirmed. Nevertheless, God does not pity the flesh. I don't know whether you know that. And he doesn't expect us to either, especially our own. Well, before Maurice and I were due to speak, a couple of people got up to give brief testimonies. The thing that God highlighted to me was that whether sickness or dire circumstances had struck, these people had carried on regardless and come through to be much stronger Christians after their trials. We'd also sung the chorus, "Let the bride of the Lamb say, 'Come, Lord Jesus,' at 3 different intervals before Maurice was to bring the message, and I was feeling extremely uncomfortable. What on earth would Jesus see in me if he did come back for his bride today? In those few brief moments, I looked back over my life and I was shocked to see just how negative I really had become. And I tried to trace it back to its source. I remember my mother saying to me on the very day I left home, "You'll be back," with such conviction and threat that I said to myself with the same inner conviction, never. And I never did go back to live with them, no matter how financially tight and difficult things got. I managed and made the best of everything, even my poverty, and never let anyone know just how destitute I was. I was very proud and positive I would make it. And I did. I threw myself into the church and Christianity. I got up early every morning to spend 2 hours with God before leaving for work. I went on solitary retreats so that I could spend my days and nights fasting and praying. Because my parents had taught me to fight and how not to take no for an answer, my determination and strength of will was, of course, put to good use. I found life had become exciting, and the more problems I encountered and overcame proved to me that if I put my mind to it, I could do anything. Even when I was 5 months pregnant with my first child and was travelling through Poland on a ministry trip with my husband, the fact that we had no money for food or accommodation didn't bother me in the slightest. And it was my suggestion that we slept in the car, even though I woke up aching all over. So what had happened? Why was it I'd become so negative? I think that maybe for the first time in that meeting, I realised that everything I had done for the Lord had not been done with His strength, but with my own. And that's the problem with strong, tough people. They can manage fine, even doing God's work in their own strength. But the Bible specifically states that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. All I was seeing now was the real me. The me when faced with the responsibility of having dependents to take care of instead of just myself. I now understood why God had given me children so late in life. He had to break me somehow and make me know just how vulnerable Joanna Barratt really is. How kind He is to try me whilst combining it with the wonderful blessing of being a mother. I honestly wasn't aware of this weakness I had. I'd done my best to take so many active measures to ensure that I was putting my trust in God. We didn't practice birth control. When each of my children had been born, I adamantly refused to allow them to be vaccinated, even though the doctors did their best to make me see sense and educate me with the problems I could be bringing on myself and my children by taking this stance. We'd cancelled all insurance for everything other than a third-party policy for the car, which is compulsory. We had no alarms on the house or car. We lived by faith and sent our children to a Christian school instead of giving them a free education in a state school, even though we had to find thousands of pounds each term for this privilege. Well, as I sat there in the meeting, I reflected on how often I'd panicked when my children had seemed ill, and how readily I'd run to the doctor for help. Often, the doctors would just end up putting my mind at rest, saying that I was perhaps overreacting because I was tired and stressed at having 3 children to cope with. But that was not the truth. In my mind and heart, I knew that I could trust God. I had the deep conviction that nothing could happen to me, my husband, my children, my home, anything, unless God allowed it. As a household, we'd given our lives to God, and with all our hearts endeavour to put into practice what Jesus said. Take no thought for your life. We can accept so easily these words, but living this out practically can be and is totally different. Truth is truth. Trust is trust. Faith is faith. And God can only prove what is truth in us by allowing circumstances which will expose the truth. Our stay at the conference centre showed me I'd failed this test, but to my advantage. And with God's help, I could change. You know, there's always room for change. It's just embarrassing when you find out that it's your own testimony that trips you up. But that's okay. In the society we live in, we have absolutely no excuse for being negative about anything. As a family, we used to personally sponsor a little girl in Guatemala through Adopt a Child, which is run by some good friends of ours. On their programme, she was fed twice a week and given dental and medical attention. She and her 2 brothers lived with their mother, stepfather and grandmother, who found it very difficult to make ends meet each week. The meals provided by this programme saved the children from being so malnourished that they had to sell their bodies in order to provide small amounts of food that they needed to survive. Over the past 17 years, Maurice and I have been visiting third world countries: India, the Philippines, Nigeria, Uganda, Malawi, many others. And we've had our eyes open to what other people have to put up with on a daily basis. You know, we're so blessed that God has allowed us to live in the West. We complain about so much, but we have no right to. We have street lighting, sanitation, clean environment, order on the roads, a police force, social security. I could go on and on with this point. And I've determined, after seeing for myself how these people live, never again to complain about adverse circumstances that I could possibly find myself in. I think also of our brothers and sisters in the faith who are currently being persecuted by family and governments alike because they love Christ and have literally taken up their cross to serve him. These people are putting into practice the exhortation that Jesus gave to take no thought for their life. They're trusting God to do with them what he wants and take care of them through their trials and circumstances. Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, the 3 friends of Daniel written about in the Old Testament, they had this similar attitude. They knew what they had to do: serve and worship God alone and not bow down to any idols. When faced with the threat of the fiery furnace, they didn't back down. They refused to submit to pressure. Not because they were convinced that God would not allow them to come to any harm. On the contrary, they knew for sure that God was able to deliver them if he so desired, but even if he didn't want to, they still would not bow to any other God. I don't know how God will perfect my heart to get me to that state where I can say, like these 3 spiritual giants, that no matter what I'm faced with, I will trust God in all circumstances and take no thought for my life. But I am encouraged because God is still at work in me, exposing areas which haven't as yet been yielded to him. It's easier to say, take no thought for your life, than do it. But even though it can be very costly and sometimes painful to our flesh, it's far better to do it than say it. And the outcome of this kind of obedience brings peace and joy, no matter what the difficulties or circumstances we find ourselves in. I hope I've encouraged you. God bless you.